Welcome to Wednesday of RSA. My name is Joshua Corman. I'm your speaker this morning for a talk entitled The Opposite of Transparency. There's a lot packed into that, whether we fully get to it or not. I have several hats I should disclose. One is I'm the founder of IamTheCavalry.org. We're turning 10 years old at Hacker Summer Camp this year. It's a group of volunteer hackers trying to save the world, or wherever bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. So we believe in saving lives through security research. And because of that work, we've had a pretty substantive impact on cyber safety policy, regulation, a couple US federal laws recently. We're going to touch on one of them, and which leads to another hat, which is I got to serve on a congressional task force for healthcare industry cybersecurity in 2016 and 2017, which is part of this journey. And then just as the world descended into pandemic at RSA 2020, Director Krebs of CISA, the newest federal agency at the time, a little over a year old, I warned him that I thought we'd see a larger volume of variety of attacks on US hospitals, and if he needed a briefing for his team to protect US hospitals during the pandemic, I would give the full briefing. A couple weeks later, he called and said, hey, you ready for that briefing? He said, no, I have a different reason. Would you like to serve your country for a year? And it turned out to be a lot longer than a year. And hacker philosophers do not belong in the federal government, but I was brought in to design and implement the CISA COVID task force and led a team of, at our peak, about 100 people trying to identify and buy down risk in hospitals, vaccine supply chains, and eventually significant swaths of critical infrastructure. So things are getting pretty bad, and part of the problem statement for I Am the Cavalry was that our dependence on connected technology was growing much faster than our ability to secure it in areas affecting public safety, human life, economic, national security. And during the pandemic and afterwards, we've seen that. We've had successful cyber attacks of the water you drink, the food you put on your table, the oil and gas pipelines that fuel our cars, homes, and supply chains, the schools your kids attend, the municipalities who run towns and cities, federal agencies charged with national security, and timely access to patient care with now proven mortal consequences. Our teams applied data science to show the excess deaths associated with ransomware attacks. So one of the hats not on there is that I have come back to the private sector. So in full disclosure, I am the vice president of cyber safety strategy at Clarity. But probably most germane to today is I'm kind of the father of SBOM in public policy. I did not invent dependency graphs, but I've been promoting this for a long time. And some people do not like transparency, so we're going to get into that, okay? So here's your mandatory disclaimer from both RSA, and my comments may not reflect those of the federal government nor my employer. This has been a very long journey, but let's get into it. Okay, so what is the opposite of hot? This will go faster if you guys participate. What's the opposite of hot? What's the opposite of darkness? What's the opposite of love? Is it? It's apathy. What's the opposite of transparency? What? Obscurity. Anybody else? Opacity. Yep, we heard opacity. I heard another one, though. All right, we're going to try to answer this. If you think of it as a verb, like an act of doing things, what's the opposite of trying to shed light? Hiding. There's lots of answers to this. Keep that in the back of your mind. The opposite of transparency. Okay, so the general flow is let's hit some first principles. I'm a philosopher by training. I didn't think it would be useful. It's turning out to be very useful. So we're going to capture some things that we fervently believe. These should be our first order indicator when someone's acting in a scared or disingenuous way. Because when we break from our first principles, our core doctrine, our core belief, it should be noteworthy. And the burden should be on that person taking an extreme position to articulate why that apparent contradiction exists. Number two, I'm not going to give an entire lecture on mis, dis, and malinformation, but it's stunning to me how many people don't know what the third one is. So we'll touch on that. And then maybe let's not admire the problem, let's add some truth and context to this very polarized debate around should we or shouldn't we have software transparency. Some symptoms are often talked about, but I think that's missing the forest for the trees. There's really three, I'm putting that in quotes, three underlying issues that are driving most of the confusion, fear, and panic around software transparency. And then let's shift to political will, like why US government, international governments, regulators, and market demand are making this no longer an optional issue. And I have some late-breaking things from the government if people remind me, and if I get through the rest in time, I can give you a couple bonus things, including the fact that this political will might be daunting, but I also don't want to just admire the problem. I want to give you helpful ways to get through it. So we're going to do the 5 stages of SBOM grief, what people feel, felt, found, and maybe how it can assist your journey towards getting collective benefit for all of us. And lastly, liability. The White House National Cybersecurity Strategy published recently, and Pillar 3 of their 5 pillars is on shaping market forces. And they've acknowledged that volunteer and free market forces only take you so far. There's a time and a place for federal government to realign and rebalance. That time is now. They want to use a light touch, but no lighter than required. We're going to touch on that as well. So some first principles. What is your favorite cybersecurity first principle? Quickly, I already primed some of you. Allow no harm. What else? Quick. Anybody? Defense in depth. What else? One more. We're never gonna get to the really cool government stuff unless. Separation of duties, great. Okay, so here's some of them. Attack surface reduction, implement least privilege, separation of duties, only strongest weakest link. Here's a couple more. It was DNS. No, really, it was DNS. I love Gene Kim's from Visible Ops. Know what you have, know when it changes, right? There's plenty of these. I kind of like these ones, right? Assume context at your peril. Anybody know where that one comes from? Before there was Zero Trust, there was the Jericho Forum. Probably one of the most salient ones. I might get hacked, but I will get fined. Fear of the auditor more than the attacker. Vendors don't have to be ahead of the threat, just ahead of the buyer. So we have a lot of things that we believe. We don't have 100% consensus on anything, like password strength or whatever. But we have things that we believe, and we know we believe. So it's really interesting when someone deviates from that. But this is probably the most famous one, and no one brought it up. Anybody know Kirchhoff's principle? Here, we'll do the Wheel of Fortune. Security through obscurity is no security at all. So look, bombs and SBOMs. Bombs, Minesweeper, maybe I'm dating myself, but there are bombs on the board, inherent and latent in all the software and digital infrastructure we depend upon. The question is, do we know where they are? Can we make an informed risk decision? Do we have transparency and visibility? They will explode one day. It could be a Log4j, it could be an Apache Struts 2, it could be a Heartbleed, but we have very opaque software supply chains. And bombs are uncontroversial. Bomb is a bill of materials. I stole a lot of these principles from colleagues and from people that studied Deming and Toyota supply chains in the 40s. They did not make bill of materials for automobiles to make them less hackable. They made them to make them more profitable, higher quality, better maintenance, Lean, Six Sigma, all these different amazing things that came out of Deming principles, Toyota supply chain principles in the 40s have been populated voluntarily for business benefit and for safety benefit by aerospace and aviation, by chemical supply, by food supply. These industries treasure their bombs. I want to take proven supply chain principles and apply them to modern software development. So let's add some visibility. So what is mis-dis and malinformation? Really quick lecture. Part of this is it true or false? So the merit of what you're saying. And part of this is there an intent to harm or not? It's really hard to measure intent in someone's heart. So sometimes we can't tell if it's misinformation, which is well-intentioned but harmful and false. And then there's disinformation, which is intentionally harmful, lies. Some of the more insidious and damaging ones are actually mixing lies with the truth. It's true, but taken out of context and used to do significant harm. And we have encountered every single one of these in the journey towards transparency. Many of you probably first heard, well, I don't want to give it away, but I'm curious when we get to the slide when you first heard of a software transparency or software bill of materials. And we have seen good faith, sincere but false beliefs, but we've also seen deliberately false or harmful narratives used to great effect. And it's just further endangering the water we drink, the food we put on our table, timely access to patient care. Some of the most opaque supply chains we have are in safety-critical technologies that can affect a disruption to critical infrastructure, basic human needs, or even loss of life. So let's do a couple examples of this. We may come back to some more in greater detail. The point here isn't to name and shame, but to at least equip you to understand what you're dealing with. So an example of misinformation, sincere but false belief is, well, isn't a software bill of materials a roadmap to the attacker? We're going to tackle that one later. And we have answered this. It's been asked and answered. We have well documented. Or, well, isn't this my intellectual property? They might sincerely believe this is their intellectual property. But there have been asked and answered, and we have not had people in good faith read or apply the truths. Like when we're investigating something, it's fine to have confusion. As things get settled or documented, continuing to act ignorantly is malicious ignorance, or malignorance, I like to call it. Another one is people are doing straw mans. They'll say, well, this thing is useless unless you do it perfectly and to 10 decimal points of precision and with the right hashes every single time and map to a database and map to this and map to that. So therefore, we shouldn't do anything until we do all of it. And in no other part of our profession in IT, or certainly not in IT cybersecurity, do we hold this same impossible standard of care for emerging infrastructure. One of the ones that is really frustrating to me is I helped author a peer-reviewed journal, Nature, with the Food and Drug Administration, with hospital practitioners, with 2 fellows from the FDA. Took years to write it, to get it approved by FDA, to go through the peer review process, to finally publish it. And it is a pro-SBOM position for medical technologies. And it was used where someone took a direct block quote from the problem statements we were writing to Transcend 4 years prior and used it as evidence that this is not ready for public policy. So it is a direct quote. This would be like saying, let's pick one of the best love stories of all time, The Princess Bride. I could accurately depict a scene where the dread pirate Roberts kidnaps Princess Buttercup. It's a terrible story of how love does not prevail because people are evil and they kill the love of her life. But that would be taken out of context because we all know it's one of the most romantic, upbeat love stories of how love prevails, everything including possibly death. So you can take these things out of context and they have been used pretty maliciously by several people. So it's extra hard when they're lying with the truth, right? Some people call these half-truths, and then there's things that are actually true. One of the ones that I'm going to be very careful in my wording here, I will not ascribe malicious intent, but malicious intent is not a prerequisite to harm. So one of the things we're going to go through, sometimes say the hard things, you have to be forthright but candid and kind. The Cyber Safety Review Board from the US government has published their first report. They're working on their second one. Their first report during Log4j took an analysis of lessons learned from Log4j. One of the findings of that report, I'm going to read it verbatim. The board spoke with representative groups for organizations currently using SBOMs in their environments, and none reported having leveraged them to identify deployments of Log4j. You cannot imagine how many people called me who absolutely used software bill of materials and software transparency to transformatively save themselves time and risk. We're flummoxed by this. I love and need the institutional trust in the Cyber Safety Review Board. I encourage it to continue. I want it to succeed. I now have questions about what do we do when we have the revelation of new data, analysis, or information, because while this report is meant to help and has done significant help, if you read the entire report, it's very pro-SBOM. It wants to encourage greater and faster adoption of software bill of materials for future Log4js because they will encounter future mass exploitation of software supply chain flaws. So on the whole, it would be hard to read the CSRB report in good faith and determine that we should pump the brakes on software bill of materials. Quite the opposite. And yet, trade associations, lobbying groups, continue to cite this sentence out of context as the reason not to implement software bill of materials in the National Defense Authorization Act, in the execution of the Executive Order 14028, in other areas. So while all of us are desperate for more transparency to know, am I affected and where am I affected, these statements are harmful. These reports used out of context are additionally harmful. And I have to ask, why are people so afraid of transparency? We're going to answer that question. But in contrast, we have other publications and comparative analytics from financial services. We're going to walk through a couple highlights from one of those. So I'm not ascribing malice. I am observing that that report has counter evidence. And despite that counter evidence, a government report is being used often to do harm, to delay and degrade the transparency that many of us want and need, especially in critical infrastructure. So there are different remedies. I'm going to skip that for now. So what is true? Let's do a couple things. Pop quiz. When did SBOM originate? Quickly, anybody? 2010. Who said that? Whoa, somebody's been paying attention. All right. Typically, I'm going to show a timeline, but a lot of people didn't know about this until Executive Order 14028 after the SolarWinds attacks. The White House put something out. There's a sentence in it I am quite fond of. I think this is verbatim. In the end, the trust we place in our digital infrastructure should be proportional to how trustworthy and transparent that infrastructure is and to the consequences we will incur if that trust is misplaced. That section encouraged that we finally need more trustworthy transparency, definitions of critical infrastructure, and encouraged that all federal agencies use their collective purchasing power to ask for software bill of materials. It asked NIST to come up with categories of criticality. It asked NTIA to come up with the president's minimum defined SBOM based on years of collaborative consensus work. And it asked subsequently OMB to come up with procurement and acquisition guidance for the federal government, and then subsequently CISA to do implementation across federal government. So that is matriculating for several years. Some people know that the reason that was possible is there was an NTIA.gov multi-stakeholder transparency workshops occurring across several years since 2018. But let's do an actual timeline. So this is not legible. It's not meant to be legible, but I know what it's going to say, so I'll walk you through it, okay? So a lot of people think this started with the NTIA working groups and the shiny one, Dr. Alan Friedman, who is around here somewhere today. But working backwards, it's actually pretty far at the end of the story. So at least for my journey, I was working at Akamai. I was the director of security intelligence. And I remember on July 13th, 2013, an Apache Struts 2 vulnerability hit most of our banks. And I said to my boss, Andy Ellis at the time, well, the world just changed. And he's like, how can you possibly know that? I said, it's open season on open source. Why the heck would you ever attack a bespoke website when you can hit all the banks? And that wasn't so much the noteworthy part, it's that they were pretty prompt and agile in identifying where they're using Apache Struts 2 vulnerable versions and remediating them. But several of them got hit again a week or two later because their IBM WebSphere, their Cisco gear, their third-party other equipment was also using vulnerable Apache Struts. So eventually, I left Akamai not because of this, for a bunch of reasons, and went to work at Sonatype as CTO, who is custodians of Maven Central, the largest open source repository in the world for Java code, the largest ecosystem of open source. And I wanted to study up from a public health perspective. Who's using which open source? Do they ever fix it? How often do they fix it? And Dan Geer and I published some things in Usenix on relative cybersecurity hygiene back in 2013. I went on the Hill that year. There was actually a law introduced that year because Heartbleed proved a gap in the law in April of 2014. So by December 2014, there was the Cyber Supply Chain Management and Transparency and Management Act of 2014. Private sector hated it, descended upon Washington to kill it with fire. It basically said anything sold to the federal government should have a machine-generated, machine-readable software bill of materials. It probably should be free of known vulnerabilities or declared where they exist. And since future vulnerabilities are inevitable, you should probably be patchable. It was considered fairly reasonable to many, but fairly problematic to software trade associations. And I could do this for hours, but I'm not going to. I'm going to fast forward and say there was no political will whatsoever to pursue that law again after it was killed with fire by a few very large, very angry software providers. But at the end of 2015, through the CISA 2015 law, Congress asked for a healthcare industry cybersecurity task force. I ended up getting named to that task force. And a couple weeks before our first meeting, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital in LA got hit by the SamSam ransomware. It was a single Java deserialization flaw and a single JBoss library and a single technology took out a hospital for a week. They had to divert ambulances up the street in LA traffic, where minutes could be the difference between life and death. You ever been in LA traffic? One block can be a very long time. They had to cancel surgeries and eventually had to move critical care patients, and it got significant national coverage. And even though the ransomware was not targeting the hospitals, it did significant harm. And I said to the whole team, this is not going to be a privacy task here. I love my privacy. I'd like to be alive to enjoy it. We're going to focus on resilient, maintainable delivery of healthcare. So one of our top findings 1 year later, on Mother's Day weekend of 2017, was that all medical technology should have a machine-generated, machine-readable software bill of materials. As we gave this to Congress, WannaCry took out 40% of UK health delivery. And 6 weeks later, NotPetya did significant harm to US hospitals. Some directly through ransoms, some indirectly through services like Nuance Software. So this created political will, and Congress, House Energy and Commerce says, hey, we like this recommendation, FDA, go do it. So FDA said we're going to require a CBOM, a cyber bill of materials for all medical devices. Once again, the Chamber of Commerce freaked out, software people freaked out, and they begged Commerce Department and NIST to get involved and stop the bad FDA. I'm being a little bit colorful in my language here. But there was a grand bargain, and TIA, not NIST, and FDA sat down and said, hey, if you come up with a useful standard for our regulatory requirements, if you come up with a useful standard in time, we will use it. So that way we don't have an accidental de facto standard for medical that is applied in ill-fitting ways to everything else. And thus started your NTIA multi-stakeholder development process. After a few years of new tools and progress through several proof of concepts in healthcare, in automotive, in energy, in aviation, the White House realized this is a project that's ready to go. It needs a nudge. So there could be lots more than that. But even if you like that history, that's not the beginning. Java's been doing this forever. Deterministic coordinate systems, POM files, build files. You can't even make your build if you don't know what's in it. Let's just get a receipt what we've done. Before that, tons of people did this kind of thing through license risk. Things like Black Duck or software composition analysis. Am I violating open source terms and conditions? Are there problematic licenses that may make my code free by accident? And even before that, as I said, this started in the 40s, guys. Not for cybersecurity, but for business value, quality, and efficiency. So these are not new, exotic, scary ideas. So why are people so terrified of them? Let's get into that. So this is SBOM, pretty cool animation, right? She's getting tired of me saying this, but I like the animator so much I married her. So we're taking proven Deming supply chain principles and applying them to modern software development. This is our canonical artwork from the same artist. We like to say we are all in a supply chain. Most of us are in the middle. That is a bedside infusion pump. It was very deliberate to pick the word final goods assembled up top. And the idea is you might have a final good that you sell into operational environments like a hospital, but you don't write it all. You have a supply chain. Your supply chain has a supply chain. Those are compound parts on top of compound parts all the way down, turtles all the way down, except eventually you get to some atomic part for which there is no precursor. So an SBOM is not all the things you've been lied to about. It is a inventory, the ingredients, a dependency graph of how you made this thing and how the things you made it from, what they made it from. And the idea here is a flaw anywhere down in the bowels there could have an adverse impact on that hospital, could shut down a hospital for a week, a month, or if we see common spirit, 22 states worth of hospitals for a protracted amount of time. So we'd like to know if there's a new attack in the wild, am I affected? Where am I affected? We want a hint, we want knowledge, we want transparency. So unlike a lot of the hyperbole about what it is and isn't and that it has false positives, the green column is the SBOM. You can get in trouble in the middle column and the final column, but all we're asking for in public policy is the green thing, just the facts. It is the ingredients, the parts, the list, the 1 through N suppliers. That's it. Armed with that transparency, that information layer, that data layer, it can be mapped to licenses. It can be mapped to end-of-life deprecated technologies. It can be mapped to possibly exploitable vulnerabilities, potentially. So these could be misused. I'll never disagree with that. But simply asking for what in it enables, as a key in a database, the ability to search, to grep, to do whatever you want to do, to be enriched, just like other data layers that we have. So a lot of the hyperbole you hear about false positives and it may not be exploitable and all those things, there are other projects to handle those. In fact, that last column is often referred to as VEX, which CISA has recently published minimum elements for VEX, which is vulnerability, exploitability, exchange. And there are several standards and formats for that as well. But when we're talking SBOM, we're talking SPDX, Cyclone DX, sometimes SWID, even though it's not really a vibrant ecosystem, but which can do a data-driven, machine-generated, machine-readable, machine-enhanceable, translatable inventory of parts. That's it. Should not be controversial. We talk about different roles. We either make software, we choose software, or we operate software. There's benefits for cost savings, for security risk, for license risk, et cetera. You can get more of that somewhere else. We got so tired of some of those sincere but false beliefs, we captured the top myths. We actually fashioned this after an FDA myth-busting document. But they include things like, wouldn't this be a roadmap to the attacker? Or isn't this my intellectual property? So we take those good faith questions and we have very solid answers about what to do about them. The president, we keep hearing from trade associations or from haters of SBOM, there's no standards, there's no defined minimum elements. There is a defined minimum elements. There is a separate president's minimum elements. There are standards that support those minimum elements, and they are translatable across each other. So there's things to get educated on. Let's go to some of the industry-generated analysis of Log4j. This is from my friend Topo. Topo has been a very strong leader and advocate in the DevOps community for supply chain hygiene principles to drive cost savings, waste reduction. They published through the DevOps Enterprise Journal, responding to novel security vulnerabilities. Here are a few slides from his longer presentation, but Topo looked at 10 organizations in the DevOps Enterprise Forum, and they found 3 patterns, and they compared the success factors of those 3 patterns. You should hear his entire talk. I'm just gonna give you some highlights. They wanted to look at how quickly did you detect, how quickly did you declare an incident, how quickly did you identify affected parties, how quickly did you remediate, and then ultimately they also measured human cost. So a couple things, the green circles, red circles, and timelines. Column 1 was they had really robust CI/CD pipelines and automation and readily available software transparency in their IT kingdom. Column 2 had good CI/CD pipelines but no SBOMs, and column 3 had neither. So in the first couple days, it was actually not security teams that noticed the Log4j thing. It was the developers who had instrumentation for supply chain vigilance on are there any known new CVEs associated with things that we use in our code. A day later, the declaration from the leaders, pretty much the same declaration of an incident from everybody. Things start to separate when you do impact analysis. Before noon, there were some mitigations in place for the good camp. It took another extra day for the middle camp, and it took 4 days for the bad camp. The separation continues, the remediation. Within 4 days, all external-facing apps were remediated. 4 days. Within 4 days, the ones who had software supply chain transparency and CI/CD pipelines and automation had all of their external-facing stuff done in 4 days. It's not all of it. They had a lot more to do versus 5 and 7. And when it came to remediation cycle continuing, as they went to other applications, 10 days for column 1, 20 for column 2, and they stopped counting, lost track for column 3. And over a more prolonged and pronounced thing, they started looking to apply vendor fixes. So the third party, the code that they found and fixed with their own internal transparency was quite rapid. They had to wait on their vendors to give them patches. And surprisingly, for reasons he writes about in the journal, it was 40 days to get and apply patches from most of their suppliers, but it was 80 days for the middle group, and that didn't immediately make sense to me, but that would be a different presentation for me to get into, and he explained it to me. But I think the most fascinating thing is the effects on people. This thing happened the first week of December, and for many of these organizations, it went well past the first of the year into spring break for their children and their families. Column 1, no one missed vacation. No one. Column 2, most people were burned out. Java developers had to cancel vacations. Others canceled, many non-developers canceled their vacations, and January and February vacations were prominent months. Same thing for column 3, but what he did not add to the graphic is column 3 burned more than a quarter of development time. All their development estimates and commitments to the business slipped over a quarter. So in one case, there's no burnout. There's a prompt and agile response. There's a really scary event, but they know where they're affected. They take remediation on their own stuff, and then they take remediation on their third-party stuff. The other ones missed their school vacations and time to market. So it's really frustrating to hear that no one was able to use software transparency when you have a designated critical infrastructure cohort of 10 organizations showing comparative differences, quantifiable differences between efficacy of response, comprehension of response, and human toil and impact. Because we're gonna have more Log4js, and we wanna make sure we're availing ourselves of the best available techniques. So that's unfortunate. Separately, one of the people who was asked to respond to the CSRB failed to hit the deadline in time, but subsequently published transparently some of their case studies. One of their better customers in financial services, within 4 days, had 80% of their 4,000 applications identified and remediated. Not just identified and remediated. In US healthcare, Sutter Health here in the state of California, one of the most mature cybersecurity programs in the country, 480 plus days later since Log4j, she still does not have an answer from 55% of her medical device makers. That's not remediation, that's identification. So with software transparency, 80% of your 4,000 apps in 4 days, opaque supply chain for hospitals, over a year later, we still don't know if we're affected by Log4j. These safety critical life safety devices have no idea what's in their own code, and they cannot equip their customers to identify and buy down risk. Opacity is going to kill people. Opacity probably has killed people. If we have the technology, let's apply the technology. So let's get to some smoke screens and some risk factors, okay? So I don't want to admire the smoke screens. Again, I think many people have sincere but false beliefs, sincere being the operative word. So here's some of the heads of the Hydra, if you know the Hydra from Greek mythology. It can't be done. Well, it can be done, but it's our intellectual property. Well, it's not our intellectual property, but we might get sued, things like that. Well, isn't it a roadmap to attacker? No, it's a roadmap to the defender. MITRE ATT&CK frameworks are a roadmap to the attacker. There are no tools. Okay, there's too many tools. There's no standards. Well, there's too many standards. We need one standard. So there's a lot of double talk, and maybe some people are sincere in those positions, and reasonable people can disagree, but we need sector-specific implementation of SBOM. But then there's letters to OMB saying we need one common SBOM for everybody. And these things are not compatible, right? So we hear a lot of these things, but what's beneath them, okay? So what are the hearts of the Hydra? Well, if we transcend them, I said in the abstract there are 3. Put those in quotes. So let's tell you what they are, okay? Number 1, and these are hard, right? I have sympathy, empathy. These are a big gulp moment. Maybe you came here because you were gulping yourself. But the 3 main drivers of why we're afraid to be transparent, I'm gonna say the quiet part out loud. Many people are violating license terms and conditions that could lead to lawsuits. You're doing something wrong, maybe not on purpose, maybe you bought a company, maybe you didn't know because we have opaque supply chains, but you are concerned that this newfound transparency may create legal exposure for you. That is true. Number 2, unfixable security debt. So these are things that are not just a library you can just update using a really old version of a really old platform with really brittle APIs, and if you had to fix it, you'd basically end of life the product immediately, right? It would be cost prohibitive to remediate these risks that you have been blindly passing to your customers for however long you've been blindly passing. And we've been whistling past the graveyard hoping no one would notice. So sometimes this is a known exploited security vulnerability. Sometimes this is a cryptographically broken library when you have crypto requirements that you can't possibly meet with that version of that library. But there are unfixable technical debt. Now the presence of unfixable technical debt is true whether you show it or not, but people are afraid of that revelation. And number 3 is probably the longer term one, especially with a lot of legacy code. People are worried about the ongoing scrutiny and accountability they may receive every time there's a new CISA.gov KEV, or known exploited vulnerability. They're gonna get a lot of calls saying, I see that you're using that library. Am I affected? When is a patch coming? Which is part of why VEX exists. But I think that concern and fear changes the math and the profitability and the staffing levels required to responsibly maintain those code bases into the future, right? And these are true. But there is a cost to the presence of these risks, just like there's a cost to the removal of these risks. So we're in a place where we had lots of unknown unidentified bombs in our Minesweeper map, and increasingly adversaries are detonating those bombs. So we're having unplanned, unscheduled work and surprise and risk, sometimes during Christmas and kids' vacations. So those are the terrifying three things. The fourth one, perhaps time permitting, we can get into, but some of our most motivated adversaries are not motivated by any of the three of those, but by other and more perplexing reasons. But what we can see is a deviation from a basic universal belief that security through obscurity is no security at all. Okay, back to the Minesweeper. The bombs exist, whether we are aware of them or not. It's better to have them found and mitigated so you can make a conscious risk decision and deploy mitigations or negotiate with your vendors as to what has to be fixed by when. So I have to go a lot faster now. I would posit to you, and if you go back and watch this later, if we applied the same arguments and scrutiny being used against SBOM to the creation and development of CVE, we would not have CVE today. It would never survive contact. Same thing for coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Isn't that going to help adversaries? Isn't it better to know versus not know? We're very hypocritical about how we apply these things. Reverse engineering tools, shouldn't we ban them? They might help someone do something bad. Log files. I have not seen a log file stop a single attack. We should get rid of log files. There's no standards for log files. Think about every single rhetoric you've heard used against SBOM, which is literally a byproduct of your build, a frictionless byproduct of modern software development. The scandals do not comport. Be skeptical when you hear scandals. And then the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We love it. It's useful to us. But isn't it a roadmap of exactly which steps the attacker took and which way? So we build these things because they enable us to be better at our jobs. And SBOM will be not a silver bullet. Alan Friedman likes to say the SB in SBOM does not stand for silver bullet. It's just a data layer, but it's a data layer that could unleash and support plural use cases. So political will. I've been saying for a long time, like the, Game of Thrones, winter is coming. I've been saying transparency is coming. Get on the right side of history. You have time to clean up your technical debt. Let's do this. SBOM is coming. Well, Executive Order 14028, as we said, is matriculating since spring of 2021. It's nearly done by June. Anyone selling to the federal government should have attestations along with the NIST guidance, the OMB guidance. And how that matriculates for SBOMs will be interesting. I put an asterisk there because it's been severely diluted and degraded out of some of the fears that were shared either sincerely or in bad faith. NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, tried to have House and Senate language, and the lobbying against it was successful. They sowed enough seeds of doubt and FUD, mostly with bad information, that did not pass through the omnibus package or the NDAA. But when they were not paying attention, what did pass is now federal law of the land is the Patch Act. The Patch Act is minimum cyber hygiene for medical devices. It gives statutory authorities to the Food and Drug Administration, like we tried to do through the Congressional Task Force on Healthcare and Cybersecurity, and now not only can they ask for a machine-generated, machine-readable software bill of materials already, come October, they won't even let you start your evaluation unless you bring your SBOM day one. So right now they'll let you start it, but you can't finish it. They'll give you a little bit more time, but come October 1st, you can't even attempt to bring a new product to market without this. That's not the only requirement in the Patch Act. You must also be patchable, which lots of vendors say you're not allowed to do, and that was never true. You also have to have a threat model, a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program, but these minimum cyber hygiene were made possible in part because we can now see that these attacks on hospitals have contributed to loss of life. We're in a new place. Why would we not use any and all available information to equip us? On top of congressional action, the White House published a pretty gutsy White House National Cybersecurity Strategy. I'm sure there are plural talks on it. I was involved in quite a bit of this, but the two that are really important to safety critical are 1 and 3. But number 3 is where they introduced the concept of liability. We'll touch on that again in a second, provided my time and pacing works out. CISA has gotten really far behind this, and even though it's not a regulatory agency, CISA, in collaboration with the NSA and the FBI and the UK government and the New Zealand government and the Australian government and the German government, they're all getting behind this idea that we have to put some burden on the producers of digital infrastructure, not just the victims and the owners and operators. In economic terms, this is the final goods assembler. This is the least cost avoider. Markets want to be efficient. You put the cost burden on the least cost avoider. So that fixes in one medical device benefit 7,000 hospitals in the US, right? Or you can have indefensible, unmaintainable, opaque equipment endangering 7,000 people. So we want to put the burden on things like secure by design, secure by default, and there's plenty of talks this week on that too. So how do we get over this? And this is going to be very, very fast and unsatisfactory. This concept comes from Kubler-Ross model, from psychology. Here at RSA conference, the Pechakucha talks, Katie Mazuris did one on the 5 stages of vulnerability disclosure grief. So I'm going to do 5 stages of SBOM grief, okay? So there's notions that in some order, not always the same order, you go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I'm going to give you a few things to think about because quite a few people, including the ones that killed the original 2014 bill with fire, are pro-SBOM now. They're doing it. They said it couldn't be done at scale. They're doing it at scale. The industrial controls vendors that said, well, we're programmable logic controllers, and we're really legacy, and we're really old. Schneider Electric rolled up their sleeves, and they did it. They have over 4,000 compliant SBOMs for industrial controls equipment. I was told on day one, Microsoft could never do this. They could never do it at scale and at scope. Microsoft has it built into Git. They're fully on board. Your build tools, your Docker, your Kubernetes, your Jenkins have plugins to spit out an SBOM. So there are people that sincerely feared this, so I understand how you feel. I felt that way too, and I found a better way. So I'm going to take you through some of these stages of grief, okay? Number 1, here we go. It's going to be a little hard to read. So these sincere but false beliefs, the denial stage, we don't use any open source, even though 90% or more of most software is open source software. We have no idea what's in there. We couldn't possibly know. If there was any flaws, our testing would have found it. We pay for an annual pen test, or we have a scanner. No one can do these at scale. There's no tooling. There's too many tools, and it would be expensive. So that's usually the sincere but false beliefs, and we have FAQs and myth-busting documents for those. Number 2, though, is the anger stage. Internal anger is, I can't believe the nerve of my customers. They want to know what risks we're passing on to them. Or we made a risk decision, it's none of their business. Or you know what, we don't even have developers on that project. We laid them off, or they moved on, or they all quit. We wouldn't know how to fix that code if we had to. What the hell's their problem? And then they start getting angry at each other, because they're like, oh my God, that's in there, we're gonna get slaughtered. So once they start to look at their technical debt, some of those things are beyond the pale. We touched on that. So there's some sincere, some insincere reactions and spin. People go into hand-waving mode. This is the bargaining stage. Well, wouldn't this be a roadmap to the attacker? This is our intellectual property. No, it's not. It's the intellectual property of the open source containers who put it in a license and gave you the right to use it under their terms and conditions. So there is IP, it's not yours, and often you are contractually obligated to declare the use of it, and if you're not, you're actually breaking the license. So we have these things, but well, isn't a one-hop SBOM better than no-hop SBOM? We'll give you partial transparency. Can we have it under an NDA? Can we just make it attestation that we have transparency, but not actually equip your workflow and your business decisions? So this is the sincere, insincere bargaining and spin. Can we have more time? Can we have a waiver? It's okay. Like I said, some of that's sincere. And then comes the depression. Geez, this might cost me my ability to sell the federal government, and like 30% of my revenue targets to the federal government. What am I gonna do? Or, oh my goodness, I can probably get through this, but this might delay my payments by a quarter or two if I have to prove alternative compensating controls. Or I just don't have anybody to fix this stuff. Every single one of those developers got laid off 2 years ago. Or they moved on to other cool projects. Or we have hundreds or thousands of potentially exploitable vulnerabilities. Not exploitable, potentially exploitable vulnerabilities. It's gonna take us forever to do that. We can't fix that. And the really scary one, guys, is we don't even have source code to the product. We have a medical device. We paid somebody in China to write the code. We never actually got source code. So we couldn't patch it if our life depended on it. And an uncomfortably large number of medical devices did that. And then comes the acceptance stage. If you're a kid, you ever read the book to your kids? If you're a parent, you ever had the book to your kids, Everybody Poops? Yeah, we all got dirty laundry. Everybody poops. But how do you roll up your sleeves and do something about it? And generally speaking, most people are not jerks about this. They say, we want the transparency, we need the transparency, we deserve the transparency, we're not gonna beat you over the head with it, right? None of us knew better, we know better now. It's not what you've done in the past that's gonna judge you, it's what you do going forward. So in that sense, the 80-20 rule is your friend. 80% of the tech debt you encounter can be paid off pretty easily, rolling to the next newest version of the library, sometimes identical APIs. Some of them, if it's too daunting, we saw people use the KEV list, the known exploited vulnerability list. Don't try to whack them all and explain why all 1,442 vulnerabilities are not exploitable. One medical device maker had exactly that many, and they went in over the weekend, and they found updating 7 packages, 7, obviated over 1,000 CVEs. So he can spend his time making excuses with the level of effort to explain why you're not exploitable, exceeds the level of effort to remediate, or he focused on the most important urgent packages and obviated over 1,000. So the 80-20 rule is really your friend here. And I expect the scrutiny will come not on all CVEs, because only 3% of CVEs ever get exploited, but rather on the KEVs, the known exploited vulnerabilities. And then let's face it, the last 20% is going to be really hard, if even fixable. But the key here is be forthright with your customers, set expectations about if and when you may be able to fix these things or not, and they can make an informed adult decision. Respect people enough to share the risks passed downstream to them. In most cases, they'll accept it because they too have to make risk decisions. You will only be judged if your level of transparency is not in line with the rest of the market and your competitors, and if your commitments are not honored. We went from a period of complete opacity. We're not going to go instantaneously to complete transparency, but if we treat it like a binary thing, we're never going to make meaningful progress. So there's tons of materials. If you are in the sincere but false beliefs category, the cure for a lack of information is more information. There's tons of it at ntia.gov/SBOM. The top FAQ questions that are just thought terminating and kill us all the time are the myth-busting ones also on that page. The full detailed FAQ, and my working group co-chair and I for CISA are about to put out the first update since the move to CISA. But the new question becomes, as we get educated, can we find a graduated expectation set to get us from current state to desired state? And even though it's anathema, most people that are even trying to do the right thing are saying, how much opacity can we add to our transparency? What do I mean by that? Well, there are people who cannot produce an SBOM if their life depended on it, and we probably should know who they are because they're not going to be as trustworthy on the long haul. And we should probably start asking for SBOMs to determine which of our vendors have relative risk and can't do them. So I'm really initially just trying to figure out who can and cannot help you identify and buy down risk. Then there's a category of who can, but they don't want to share them publicly, so they might make you sign an NDA, which I think is an anti-pattern, but we can tolerate that for a little while if it gets us moving. And then some of them will say, we'll just share it publicly. Go to jupiter1.com/SBOM. On Sunil Yu's first day, the author of the Cyber Defense Matrix, on his very first day, he published his entire SBOM right on the website. He's not the only one, but when he was at Bank of America, every single purchase would say, give us an SBOM. If you can't, the 20% discount. So opacity could be how many hops, but that usually hurts you on things like Urgent 11, Ripple 20, a lot of the public attacks. You could redact things. Maybe we should tolerate redaction for a while. If someone has dirty laundry or dirty sins, and they don't want to get caught yet, I don't think this strategy is going to last very long, but you could say this house may contain lead paint. My co-chair and I made something you can't read here, but we often hear that until you do X, Y, and Z and all these other things, it's useless. That's not true. Even if you ask for an SBOM and you throw it in the trash once you get it, the next time there's a Log4j, your vendor will not take over a year to answer if they're affected. They will now know because you asked them to know. So even if you never look at it again, and there were no toolings, which there's plenty of, even asking for one is all I'm asking you to do this year. So we're also nearing publication, a 2-pager on procurement and acquisition. It's unlegible there, but basically if someone will give you an SBOM, good. If they won't, here's a series of attestations and contractual commitments that you want to get to offset the lack of transparency. And it's things like we want a discount. Sunil will get 20% discount, or we need an additional approval process, which takes an extra 90 days. You could say, I want you to strike anything that prevents me contractually from reverse engineering. So if you can't tell me what's in it, I'm going to tell myself what's in it, and you're going to strike those clauses. You have to make an attestation that there are known exploited vulnerabilities in this code at the time of sale, and you have a contractual commitment to telling me within 30 days if there's a new one. And we'll sue you if you break your contract. So there's things that can be done by you even if your vendors can't give you the transparency, so they're not going to hide anymore. And back to the President's National Cybersecurity Strategy on Shaping Market Forces, liabilities come in, folks. They said, we're introducing software liability and the potential for safe harbor. So what do I mean by this? It would take me an hour to explain this diagram. Basically, the NIST cybersecurity framework focuses on the operators, the owners and operators of critical infrastructure or enterprises. CISA.gov bad practices are somewhere in the middle, but those SBOMs, every one of those industries has a supply chain. And the software transparency is meant to equip and enable decision support. But liability on the final goods assembler, which is a term of art from 1917, McPherson versus Buick, it's possible that in the introduction of software liability, the people running away from SBOM will run towards it because it could be your safe harbor. I told my customer what was in it. I gave them a patch. If they still accepted the risk and failed to apply the patch, that's on them, not on me. But right now, if you are opaque and the source of a problem, you should expect liabilities coming, domestically or internationally. So perhaps the thing we've been hating could be the thing that keeps us from pure liability. So don't lie, don't support lies, don't tolerate lies. If someone's speaking incongruently with our first principles, be circumspect. Lots of educational tools, SBOM at CISA.gov. There is a SBOM-orama in LA the first week of June, and expect a Federal Register from CISA on that. It's in person and virtual. And here's the things I'd like you to do in the first week, in the first 3 months, in the first 6 months. But thank you for your time today. The recording is ending, and let's talk about transparency in the hallway or after we hit stop. Thank you.